Hi everyone, it's Ami here. Today we are going to be looking at all the books that I read in September and October. So, in essence, my reading wrap up. That was probably the most awkward opening into anything ever, but I'm still getting used to it, okay? I'm not a pro, and if you've watched my videos, you probably know that. Let's get into it. I'm going to start off by saying that I technically didn't read a book in September. And if you've watched my previous videos, then you know that I have been looking forward to reading Dream Count by Chimamanda and Ngozi Adichie. And I finally started to read the book in September. And it kind of put me in a book slump because I really struggled through it, but I was very determined to get through it. Usually, if there is a book and I'm struggling, whether it's in terms of getting into it or it's in terms of not particularly feeling connected to the characters, not particularly getting into the plot, I DNF. But there is a part of me that just wouldn't let this book go. And so I took a break once I hit the kind of reading slump that prevented me from essentially reading anything else. So I kept on trudging through, and then I decided to switch from reading it on the Kindle app to an audiobook. Now that I have finished the book, now that it took me a month and a half to read Dream Count, I now realize that this is a book that while I did not enjoy, I needed to read. And I think now there is a lot of clarity as to why I couldn't let it go, now that I've had an opportunity to not only finish it, but sit with my thoughts on it. It is a book that, whilst I've rated it 3 stars, I truly don't know that I know how to rate it, because this has without a doubt been the most complicated read of my life. I can't say whether I like it, I can't say whether I dislike it, I can't say whether I love it, and I cannot say whether I hate it. I feel like I'm being pulled in several directions and I don't know where to go with this book. But I'll start by saying that this is a book that desperately needs to exist. I think it tackles subject matter that we as a society need to address. If you've been craving to read about a book with female characters who are complicated, nuanced, drawn out, pulled in several directions, women that you don't immediately either feel maybe a draw to, women who maybe you don't even like. It is a book that looks at the lives of 4 different women in 4 different circumstances. I feel like throughout my reading journey, whenever I encounter a female character, I know straight away whether or not the author wants me to like her or to hate her, be it the main female character or maybe a side character. My thoughts about them are usually quite simplified because there is just this way that female characters are written about in books that puts them in one box or the other, usually. For me anyways. I don't know about other people. But with this book, the reason why these characters are so different for me is because there is no place to put them. There is no box to put any one of these 4 women. They are scattered around the place. They are representative of so many places and so many people and so many circumstances. And it's a big part of the reason why this book needs to exist. I don't even know how to do this review because I'm still so confused about how I feel. And so I think if I go through each woman in the book, hopefully you'll be able to pick out my feelings, because even I feel like I need to go through this book with a therapist probably, which I don't think I've ever felt before. Basically, Dream Count follows 4 different women, and they're all interconnected in some way. Their names are Chiamaka, Omelogor, Zikora, and Kadiatou. I think maybe having Chiamaka at the heart of it, because I think she is the reason why these women are interconnected, and without her, they wouldn't necessarily be in each other's lives. So not because I particularly view her as the heart of the story, but I view her as the tether between these women. Omelogor is Chiamaka's cousin. Zikora is Chiamaka's best friend, and Kadiatou is Chiamaka's maid turned friend. So Chiamaka employs her, and then they become close, and their relationship becomes more than professional. When I explain Chiamaka's character, it will then become clear to you why a relationship between them was almost inevitable based on her personality. Chiamaka is a travel blogger. She was born into a really wealthy family. She grew up quite privileged. She went to the best school. She was around really well-to-do people. And then she goes to university in America, and then she eventually becomes a travel writer. And the reason why she is able to travel as much as she does and almost take on a hobby as a job before her blog picks up and before she gets success and like a publishing deal, her parents are able to offset a lot of her expenses, and they bought her house. In many ways, she's able to dabble in her hobbies and not get a quote-unquote real job because she doesn't have financial pressures or burdens. Whilst you can tell that her parents want her to get a real job, to get married, settle down, they're not particularly forceful about it. So they will at times bring it up and everything, but at the same time, they're not particularly pressuring her to follow that traditional path. And so she's just doing what she wants. I believe she has 2 older brothers. Her brothers are twins, if I'm not mistaken. Her brothers kind of cushion her from that level of expectation that there usually would be on a female child, because again, they're expected to get married and have children, and they have. And so again, that's another level of, I suppose, cushion for her to not particularly conform to what is expected of her by both Nigerian society and whatever her parents' wishes for her are. She's very cushioned by all the advantages in life that she has. But she's a very kind person. She's very sweet. She's a people pleaser. It's unlikely that you'll ever see her be rude, be mean. But there is a part of her that is very much desperate to be known. She wants this all-encompassing kind of love. Chiamaka is not particularly a pragmatic person. She is very idealistic. There is a kind of love that she wants and she's desperate to get. She's the kind of person where the most fulfilling kind of relationship to her would be somebody who knows her to her very core, somebody who knows her in and out, somebody who is attuned to her emotions, her thoughts, her feelings, and somebody who doesn't judge her for them, somebody who doesn't try to change her for them. That is what is most ideal to her. And so that puts her in a position where she's extremely desperate to have that, but she's not desperate enough to take the plunge to marry somebody who is not matching that criteria. So she's constantly falling in love with people, getting in ill-advised sort of relationships, because she's on a quest to find that person that embodies what it is that she is looking for. And so with her, she is consumed and she's occupied by being in a relationship. But once it comes to taking that final step into marrying somebody, she then hesitates and pulls back because it's not what she wants. They're not giving her what she wants. I kind of relate to her in some ways and not others. I don't think I'm a people pleaser. But also with Chiamaka, I understand her unwillingness to settle, essentially, because I've always said, for me, marriage in a general sense is not the end goal for me. People enter into relationships just so that they are not alone, just so that they can be in a relationship with somebody and have that, social status of being a taken man or woman. But for me, I don't really feel that. I feel like a relationship has to be good. A relationship has to be healthy for me to entertain it. And if it's not, I'm not interested. So in a way, I related to Chiamaka. I related to her unwillingness to just settle for anything and everyone. But at the same time, there was a relationship of hers with Darnell, who she met whilst at university. And everything about him was off-putting. There was not a single redeemable quality about this man. And she stayed with him for far too long. But again, at that stage, she was quite young. And she was hoping that with time he would sort of bend, maybe not bend, but he would change. He would grow into being what she wanted him to be. And that was obviously not going to be the case. And so I just think that she spent far too long with Darnell, and I wanted her to stand up with him. He was the most ungrateful weasel. He thought he was so much better than her, even though he wasn't. He thought he was so much smarter, so much brighter, so much more deserving of everything that life had to offer. He resented how well off her parents were. He resented how much they cared for her. He disrespected her. He disrespected her parents. He had not an ounce of respect for her or their relationship. He took advantage of her all the time. Honestly, I don't even consider myself somebody who's prone to violence, but I wanted to hurt Darnell because he was such a waste of space, and I was just desperate for her to wake up. You're spending too much time with a man that clearly doesn't want you. So please, get yourself out of there. But anyway, she goes through a series of relationships. But for me, the men in these stories, even though the impact that they have on the women as characters obviously are things that are long-lasting and are quite significant, I didn't really care about the men in these stories. They were more so, I suppose, vehicles to finding out why the women were the way they were and why they ended up the way that they did. But I wasn't necessarily interested in them. So I'm not going to go through every single man that each woman had a relationship with, because I just quite frankly don't really care that much about them. Their relationships with the men in their lives are in part why I dislike this book in a way. If I was going to talk about anybody else, I'd probably talk about Chuka. He was probably her most stable relationship, but at the end of the day, I don't think that they were compatible. I feel like a relationship between Chia and Chuka might have worked if she was being pragmatic about the situation. If she really wanted to get married and she really wanted to have children and she really wanted to have that white picket fence, but she was able to understand that she was not going to get everything with one particular person, and she would have to weigh the good and the bad and then decide if it was worth taking. Chuka, I think, would have been a pragmatic choice, but I don't really think that Chia is a pragmatic person. So I understood why she didn't end up with him, even though I know that people have said that she should have. But I think Chuka would have been the sensible choice, but he would not have necessarily lit her on fire the way that she wanted to. And so I understand why she didn't end up with him. There are parts of Chia that I admired and found inspirational. I liked the fact that she knew exactly what she wanted, and she wasn't willing to settle. I liked the fact that she was able to understand herself in a way that I didn't think that the other characters understood themselves. There is a sort of digging into herself that I detected really quickly that I don't think particularly existed for the other three women in this story. I admire the fact that she was a female character who was not necessarily traditional, who had sort of out of the box kind of views, because I feel like I don't often see female characters that are that way inclined. I think that she needed to grow. She needed to get some boundaries. She needed to work on her self-esteem and her self-confidence. I love the fact that she liked to travel, because traveling is my ultimate dream. People talk about getting married and having kids, but I think the dream that I always think about constantly, about things that I know that I would regret not doing if I didn't do it, traveling is always somewhere very near to the top of that list. And so I really liked reading about a woman who had an unquenchable thirst for traveling, and I love seeing that she could do it, and I love seeing her being supported by her family to do exactly that, especially a Nigerian woman who is being given, I guess, freedom and autonomy to do just that, even though there are people around her that are like, do you want to do something serious? But for her, that is what her passion is, and she's in a situation in which she can do that, and so she does. I struggled with Chia's lack of boundaries. I just wanted her to stand up. I struggled with her self-esteem issues. Even though I admired her independence, I felt as though there was a part of her that didn't particularly dwell in reality. Like, I wanted her to be a bit more grounded. Essentially, it's probably a result of just the way that she grew up. It's probably a result of everything that she has or has not been through. I just kind of wanted her to be a bit more realistic. She's definitely the glue of the group. She's the woman that brings them all together. She's integral to the story because of that. I just wanted to shake her sometimes, and I think many people who have read the book will relate to that as well. Then we come to Zikora, who is Chia's best friend. Zikora I found to be the most annoying. So she's a high-powered attorney. She lives in the US. She's successful. She works in a very good firm. She makes good money. She provides for herself. But I think Zikora is the one that I struggled with the most, especially because in an age where there is a lot of online discourse about male-centered women and how they present themselves in the world, how the male-centeredness of their personalities impacts not only them, but the women in their lives and the men in their lives too. Zikora, I think, was extremely entrenched in it. It took me the longest to get through her portion because Zikora triggered me, because Zikora is the kind of person where in many ways she's able to see the harms of the patriarchy, but she's unwilling to do anything about it. She feels hostile to people who are questioning things and are doing things that are different. The book talks about her obviously wanting to get married and her wanting to have children and how much that means to her. Obviously, because of her particular circumstances. She comes from parents who are okay. I don't think they're as wealthy as Chia's parents, but they're able to provide for her. Her mom had fertility issues, and so her mom was only able to have her. And I think she experienced a lot of pregnancy loss. And so her father married another woman so that he could have children, as I think is kind of typical for a certain kind of African man. There is a part of her that resents how much her mother put up with her marriage to her father. She doesn't particularly feel connected to her mother because, again, I feel like when you are so entrenched in being so male-centered, it kind of desensitizes you to the feelings of other people around you, particularly if you have female children. The thing about her mother is a successful person in her own right. She has a school, she is a successful school, she makes her own money. But there is a part of her mother that has this, I married this man, I had a child with this man, and it doesn't matter what he puts me through, I will always be married to him. This is my place. You know, that unwillingness to leave a toxic situation because it's the basket in which you've put almost every egg. And so I think there's a part of her that resents the fact that her mother just lets her father trample all over her. There is a part of her that while she sort of realizes this in the back of her mind, she's stuck. It's a cycle and she's stuck in it and she doesn't know where to go. She loves Chia because Chia is very non-judgmental, very easygoing. And so she's able to, I suppose, be herself with Chia without feeling particularly judged. But her problem is mostly Omelogor, and they don't get along because if there is a spectrum, Zikora is here and Omelogor is here. I think that they probably are people who would never be friends if they didn't have Chia in the mix of it, putting them together, because you can tell that there is a grapple between them. They don't particularly say that they get annoyed with each other, but you can tell every time that there's a conversation that involves the three of them, there's always tension between Omelogor and Zikora, because Omelogor is outspoken and she's vocal and she tells people how she feels, and Omelogor, while well-meaning, there is a very judgmental angle to the way that she kind of expresses herself, and that is in direct opposition to Zikora's feelings, and so they don't really get along. So Zikora frustrated me because I felt like because she was so desperate to have that family, it put her at a disadvantage, and she ended up being, I don't want to spoil the book, but she didn't end up getting that relationship that she wanted. When she was going through her relationship with different men, there were so many signs that maybe hinted at the kind of ending that she would get because she was allowing herself to be treated any which way by these different men. If there was an ocean of patriarchy, Zikora was in till her shoulders, her head barely going just below the surface. Zikora was a complicated character for me because if you read the book, you can tell that she can see certain issues. It's not as if she thinks her life is ideal. It's not as if she is oblivious to the patriarchy's impact on her and the way that she's been raised and her mother. But still, she's not doing anything, and it's just frustrating to see, to read, to hear. She's one I felt the least connected to because she seems like a very bystander kind of person, not particularly wanting to take a stance. She was a lot for me. When I got to Zikora's part, it's when I started experiencing the book slump because I wanted to read her story, and I was interested in why she ended up the way that she did. But even still, she frustrated me to no end. To say something positive about Zikora though, because I feel like in this review I was quite hard on her. Chimamanda has a short story called Zikora, and I realized that her story I had read before. So if you've read that, then you probably know about the Zikora in Dream Count. But one thing I loved about Zikora, this is a bit of a spoiler, so if you don't want a spoiler, I would suggest skipping this part. I'll put a sticker here, so once the sticker goes away, you'll know that the spoiler is over. With Zikora, I really love the fact that she began to see her mother in a new light. She took the time to analyze her relationship with her mother after she had her own baby, to see why her mother did the things that she did, to get to a place of understanding with her mother. And I also love the fact that she named her son, because if you read the book, you would know that her father suggested a name for her son, despite not making the same efforts to see her and her son to come to America, and despite the wreckage that he had, whether knowingly or unknowingly, caused to his family. And so when she had her baby by herself, because she was abandoned by her baby's father, they're thinking about names, and her mother suggests a name, and her father calls and suggests another name. And she was in a situation where she didn't actually have a name of her own choice, and she names her child after the name her mother wanted, not her father. And I thought it was a very profound moment. It felt profound to me that she took the name that her mother had suggested, and I think it changed the trajectory of their entire relationship. So if Chimamanda was going to do something ever in her mother's sort of POV, I think that we will find that it is probably something that changed the trajectory of their relationship, because it felt like a weight being lifted from the tension of their relationship, and it felt like a moment for them. It then led to her mother lifting the veil of certain things that she had never spoken about. The fact that she would pick her mother in that circumstance over her father. And that is something that I wanted to highlight, because I think the complication of her mother is that she's a woman who is suffering from the wounds of not being able to have done what a significant portion of the world thinks is her only job to do, even though she's more than a birthing individual. And so she's suffering with the pain of her husband getting another wife. So I think that moment was quite significant to have been chosen by her child in that way. And even though I had struggles with Zikora, her taking the name her mother suggested was a really big moment for me. Now we're going to come to Omelogor. Wow. Omelogor, for me, I've seen people's reviews of this book, and I know that Omelogor is not a lot of people's favorite. She's actually a lot of people's least favorite in this book. But Omelogor is pretty much, I think, my favorite character in this book. The thing about Omelogor is, I didn't know how much I needed to read about a female main character who is like Omelogor, because she is complicated. You don't know whether to love her, you don't know whether you like her, but you are intrigued by her. There is a ruthlessness and a recklessness to Omelogor that I absolutely could not get enough of. She's just vicious, she's outspoken, she's financially savvy, she's smart, she's on it, she's perceptive. She makes ill-advised decisions, but you can see that it comes from a good place. Because of the amount of time that she spends, I suppose, unattached to people, it gives her this view that other people constantly miss. Omelogor is Chiamaka's cousin. They grew up together. They're very close. She becomes a financial analyst and she works with high-powered political men. She works to handle all their finances. And so she is probably privy to a part of Nigeria and a part of the boys' club that a lot of women don't really get access to because of the job that she does and the way in which she navigates that job and that arena. She is able to put aspects of herself aside for a greater cause. I don't know how to describe Omelogor. Omelogor is so complicated, but I loved her so much because her character was so compelling to me. She's very confronting of societal expectations. So why women are supposed to marry, have children, even when they may not have considered why they're doing any of those things. Why men behave the way that they behave. And so she actually decides to leave her financial analyst job. Actually, I think she had the financial analyst job in Nigeria. But she decided to do a master's in pornography, which again, I think there's something about Omelogor just constantly pushing boundaries. She's a boundary pusher. She's not a woman that you could ever put in a box. She refuses to bend to the will of people around her. When I think about her character, I feel very protective of her because I can imagine just how many people don't like her, and it makes me sad because I really do. The thing is, it's not that I like everything about her. I can see her flaws. I can see how she can come across as abrasive and unfeeling. The thing about Omelogor is everything that she thinks she's doing it because she thinks it's right. But sometimes she doesn't have the right approach. The interesting thing about Omelogor is despite the fact that she was this person that was wanting to confront why certain behaviors appeared in people, there was a part of her that I felt I didn't know. And I don't know whether that was intentional on Chimamanda and Ngozi Adichie's part, but there was a part of her that wasn't willing to dig into herself, a part of her that she wasn't willing to acknowledge. And it felt like an open secret between maybe the author and the reader. It's like there are certain things and there are certain signs, and Omelogor is not willing to open up in that way so that we can know the answer to this particular thing. And I think it's her relationship with men. People have speculated, and so have I, that Omelogor is actually queer, but there is a part of her that is not willing to delve into it, or maybe she just doesn't think that it's necessary to do. I don't know. So Omelogor is somebody who I think she's extremely complicated. She's no two-dimensional character. Let me tell you, she will send you on a roller coaster because that is just who she is. There's a part of her that wants to explore the taboo, explore things that nobody's exploring, things that nobody's talking about, even though we can see the impact right in front of our very eyes. And there is a bravery of her that I just deeply admired, but I wanted to know more. I wanted to delve more. And I think Chimamanda is the kind of author that, you know, when people accuse authors of thinking that their audience is stupid, Chimamanda is not that author. She doesn't think you're stupid. I think with Chimamanda, one thing that I have constantly seen in her writing is her confidence in her readers' abilities to use their own brains, to draw their own conclusions, to come to their own messaging. Everybody has an agenda. Everybody has their own thoughts and their feelings. But I think with Chimamanda, you can see, I guess, her thoughts and her feelings. You can see the ideas that she's interspersing throughout the book. But at the same time, she wants you to come to your own conclusions. She wants you to think. And I think with all the characters, you can see her wanting her readers to dig deeper, to think, about how this character makes them feel. But I think it was the most noticeable with Omelogor. She wants you to think. She's not giving you all the answers. She's telling you, well, you come to your own conclusions about what you think this character is. So for me, I know what I think about Omelogor, but I also don't know what I think about Omelogor. But I love her, and I think she's endlessly intriguing, and I'm so drawn to her. Omelogor, out of every character in this book, is the person I would most like to be friends with in real life. Because on the surface, she seems like such a cold, unfeeling person, but then you read about her and there's just this depth to her. And there is a sense of justice that is brewing in her, and it's almost like it's brewing so deeply in her that she can't help but express herself in the way that she does because she's frustrated at the things that she's seeing. She does what she can to mitigate the suffering around her. She tries, but she doesn't have the best approach, and it almost seems as if the injustices of the world and of women, it bubbles and festers in her until she doesn't know what else to do, so she just reacts, and then it ends up not maybe particularly coming across the best. She's very interesting. She's definitely my favorite, I think, which is interesting for the time of my life that I'm in. I think she best represents the thoughts that I have in terms of being a woman and what that means, because she's willing to question things that people around her may be not questioning, and she doesn't really know how to express herself, and she means well, but she doesn't always have the best delivery. And I think there are parts of that I can relate to in my own everyday life. I know she's not for everybody, but she's for me, and I really like her. The only thing is, as much digging as she's doing into other people and the society around her, I would have liked her to delve more into herself. There is a part of her that she hasn't explored, that she needs to explore in order for her to, I suppose, become maybe the woman that she wants to be, but isn't quite there yet. She's close, but she's not there. In many ways, she's ahead of the curve, right? And she's one of those people that will suffer from being ahead of the curve, if that makes any sense. We come to Kadiatou. She's born and raised in Guinea. She eventually moves to America. She has a child. She settles there. Actually, she meets Chia because she starts working in a hotel. And Chia, being Chia, is just very friendly and very sweet. And so they get talking, and then Chia hires her to look after her house. And Kadiatou's story is heart-wrenching. The thing about Kadiatou's story is that I had watched Chimamanda's podcast interview with Trevor Noah prior to reading this book, and immediately I started reading Kadiatou's story. I knew that it was inspired by Nafissatou Diallo's story. Kadiatou is a traditional woman. She obviously has dreams of getting married and having children and fulfilling what she thought were her duties as a woman. As somebody who grew up in poverty, in a rural setting, she was also the older daughter. She didn't really ever have the time or the space to envision something different for herself. She just thought she would follow the traditional path, have a family, live a blameless life, and die eventually. But she had a sister who was ambitious. Even though she wasn't a main character, Kadiatou's sister was probably one of my favorite characters because I feel she's who I would have been if I had been in their circumstances. She was somebody who wanted more for herself. She was somebody who was able to recognize the wrongdoings around her despite not having that much exposure herself. But there was a part of her that knew that the things that she was being subjected to, she and her sister, were not right. There was a part of her that wanted more for herself, and she had started on the path to achieve that in the best way that she could, and unfortunately her life was cut short before she was able to realize that. And there is a part of her that has stayed with me despite not occupying a huge part of this book. She has had an impact on me. She has a bigger impact on me than Chia or even Zikora had on me, despite not being one of the main four. And Kadiatou is somebody who you just want her to catch a break. She's somebody that deserves everything good that life has to offer because she has dealt with so much that has not been within her control. So she's dealt with poverty. She's dealt with female genital mutilation, which is a topic in this book. She's dealt with domestic violence. She's dealt with sexual assault. She's dealt with rape. She's dealt with trying to make it in a world in which she doesn't particularly speak the language, trying to navigate as a single mother, trying to navigate as an immigrant in America. She has an array of things that she's dealt with, and at the core of it, she's such a good person. She's such a loving, and she has so much love to give, and you can tell right off the bat. She's just such a fundamentally good person to her core, and so I have so much feeling for Kadiatou, not strictly because of what she went through, but because of who she was. Even though she didn't particularly understand her sister's ambition, she always supported her sister. She loved her sister so much. And, Kadiatou is somebody that has been consistently failed by the people around her, whether that is her relatives, the system in America, her boyfriends, her husband, her employers, the law, society. She's just a character that is constantly being failed by people around her. And yet she still shows up for so many people in her life. And I think if Chia was the glue that held Omelogor and Zikora together, I think that Kadiatou is like a seal. Because one thing that is most common about these three women is how much they love Kadiatou and how much she has helped them in their time of need. She cooks for Chia all the time. She takes care of Chia's home. With Zikora, she helped Zikora when she was pregnant. She would go to braid her hair. She would cook for her. And then when Omelogor had a breakdown in the book, she was also there for Omelogor, encouraging her. So the women feel very strongly about Kadiatou, not only because they want to help her at a time where she needs the help, but because they can see the value that she brings to their lives and it's not lost on them. And so when she is raped by a very important man, you can go and look at the story of Nafissatou Jallow. I believe the case that she was a part of is actually called New York versus Strauss-Kahn. When I think of Kadiatou, I feel violent anger. I feel just very emotional because I just want her to have something good for herself because she deserves it and because she didn't deserve to be filled by so many people. And because she's representative of, in many ways, so many women around the world. And in my own quiet moments and times, the things that occupy my mind are things that have happened to Kadiatou and women like her. And even though I can't relate to many aspects of my life, her impact on me is profound. And if you read the author's notes of this book, you realize that the impact of this character on Chimamanda is immense. And reading the author's note really put in perspective who this book was really about and how, certain things came to be. And with Kadiatou, I just feel angry on her behalf. I think about so many women who would have experienced one or many of the things that she has gone through, and it makes me very sad for the unfairness, the cruelty, the judgment, the violence. There is a part of Kadiatou that I am inspired by because despite all this, she remained unchanged as the fundamentally good woman she was. But there is a part of me that also feels almost in a way broken by her circumstances, broken by the systemic failures that stood in the way of her getting sort of the life that she deserved. I'm actually getting emotional because I don't even know how to describe her character. She was a phenomenal woman, she is. It was so frustrating to see how she was treated. She was the one who was wrong, but she was treated like an animal and a criminal because people are so blinded by hate and racism and misogyny, and it makes you so angry. Every person needs to read about her. And then when you've read the book, you go and read about Nafissatou Jallow and you understand why this case and this woman has such a big impact on both the readers of this book and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who did write this character. I feel too much to be able to do her character justice. When it comes to Kadiatou, my feelings are very raw, and maybe if I get to a place where I feel like I can describe her, I might come back. But all I know is that she is the kind of woman that you would be proud to know. She's the kind of woman that you want better for. She's the kind of woman you know that she's strong. Time and time again, she proved how strong and how capable and how powerful she was. But at the same time, you want to cushion her in love and acceptance because you know that it is what she deserves. And the daughter in the book that she had is so lucky to have her as a mother, to have that kind of woman to look up to. Is to have read about a character like Kadiatou is something that I consider an immense privilege, because I don't know what her impact is at present, but I feel like if society ever comes to a point where they want to tackle systemic issues against women, she's a character that would or should come up as a sort of example. I don't know. The thing about Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is, even though I've had quite a complicated relationship with this book, she's still an author that is one of my favorites of all time, because she is able to evoke feeling in me that not many authors are able to do. You can tell that she's extremely well read. You can tell that she's curious. You can tell that she's questioning. And this book, I think, is a demonstration of all those characteristics. Her desire to tell women's stories, her desire to explore more, to dig deeper, to answer questions. I don't know whether she intended for it to be a book in which the reader is constantly being made to stop and think, rather than something that they flew through. I don't know whether she wanted it to be fast-paced, slow-paced, medium, but I don't know. But what I do know is that this book needs to exist. And I'm glad that it does, despite the fact that I wouldn't necessarily call it a favorite book of mine. But then again, it's like, what makes a book a favorite? Because the impact of this book is immense on me. You think about these arbitrary rating systems that we have for books. It's the kind of book that just, you probably don't realize what the impact of it will be until years down the line. But it's one of those books where I'm like, I suppose, burst my bubble about how I've been rating books, because I can see the significance, I can see the importance, I can see the impact that it's had on me. But why am I hesitant to call it a favorite? Because I didn't fly through it, because I didn't read it in a week or a few days, and I read it in a month and a half. The thing I know for a fact is that this is a book that everybody needs to read. If you want insight into what people talk about when they speak about the patriarchy, for people who want to explore more about what it means to be a woman, for people who have questions. I do wish it would have been a bit less male-centered, but at the same time, I do understand that these women have been scarred and changed by the impact the men in their lives have had on them. It's a complicated one, isn't it? It's a book that needed to exist, and I'm glad I read it, albeit in a month and a half. And the fact that I don't have a rating for it, I don't have a straightforward answer to how I felt about anything about it, and the fact that I feel like I'm in limbo ever since I've read it. I've been in shock, I've been angry, I've been inspired, I have been wrecked. I feel like it's an important book, especially for Nigerian women, especially this generation that I feel has an appetite for questioning things and people and systems around them. But it's also good for the older generation who maybe didn't particularly have the space to think about books like these. I don't know how to rate it, but I read it and those are my thoughts. Sorry, I ended up being longer than usual, but bear with me. Then with October, I actually discovered a new author. I've been seeing her books and I realized that I have a bias that I need to admit. I've attached a stigma of books that have really attractive men with tattoos on a book, and in my head I dismiss them as not being as serious or not being very good books, or being like smut fests with little to no character development and exploration. And that is something that I'm actively working on, because these books, despite the fact that I avoided them, I actually really enjoyed them, and I actually want to talk about them because they are more than what they appear to the human eye. People say don't judge a book by its cover, but you really just can't at this rate. Some of the best stories don't really have the best covers. So if you are the kind of person who has in the past judged a book solely by its cover and thought that you knew what would be in it because of what was out of it, I want to encourage you and challenge you to look deeper than what the cover looks like, because you might be surprised as to what you find in there. So I read the Never Have I Ever series by Willow Dixon, and I started with Never Have I Ever Had a Bromance with a Teammate, which follows Jax and Matt. By the way, this book is book number 3. I have this thing where I read them out of order, and I really need to stop doing that. They can be read as standalones, but there are slight spoilers because, again, this is a series following a group of friends. And this particular book, Never Have I Ever Had a Bromance with a Teammate by Willow Dixon, follows Matt and Jax, who are best friends. They're joined at the hip. They both play baseball. They're always in each other's pockets. Because they're teammates, they play very well together. They're both extremely talented. And so the guys on their teams are usually kind of like poking fun at how close they are, because they're just always joined at the hip and seem to be together and seem to love being in each other's company. They're besties. Jax, he's not openly gay, but there are people who know that he's gay. He doesn't particularly advertise it because he doesn't really want to be unfairly impacted by his sexuality, because he wants to be judged solely on his play, which is fair enough. You can't control who you are attracted to, but you should be judged based on your own merit. And he's been attacked in the past by like homophobic people, and he just wants to live his life the way a straight person is allowed to do, which I think is completely fair and completely valid. And so he doesn't particularly advertise the fact that he's gay, even though people know. And so his best friend is Matt. Matt also plays baseball, but Matt has always been under the impression that he was straight. right? And he has never particularly questioned whether he was attracted to men before. And then he kind of gets an epiphany that this is something that he might like to explore. And so he basically asks Jax to explore with him because they share everything and they talk to each other. And so Jax kind of figured out that he was having these questions, and so because Jax was obviously attracted to him, they decided, okay, let's just go with it and see where that takes us. And so they start to sleep together. I wouldn't even say they're friends with benefits, because there was already a depth of feeling. They already loved each other prior to all of this happening, because they're best friends and they're very close and they share. And you can tell their relationship is not just surface level. They have a friendship that's really, really beautiful. It just blossoms from there. They start to sleep together and then they eventually fall in love. And I think this book is really beautiful because as much as there is a lot of smut in it, one of the things I really liked about it is the fact that the characters had depth to them. Jax, in his struggles as wanting to be judged by his skill, by just wanting to exist in a world that is willing to see him as more than just a gay man. And then you have Matt, who is dealing with familial pressure. So he is very good at baseball. He's figuring out that he doesn't actually enjoy it. And he has a quite emotionally abusive dad who is pushing all his own baseball dreams onto Matt. And Matt, he's experiencing panic attacks because he doesn't want to disappoint his dad, but he does know that a professional baseball career is not what he wants. And so he's dealing with that pressure. He's dealing with exploring bisexuality. There are parts of him that don't actually connect to the things that he's supposed to portray about himself, and not wanting to party as much. So sometimes he panics. And then also there was talk about not particularly conforming to heteronormative standards. I don't want to spoil it, but there is a part of this book that I really liked about them exploring different aspects of what it means to be a man and breaking those boundaries in order to achieve happiness. So I think for me, that was probably the most important part of this book. It was them just exploring and accepting themselves for who they are, and then just having that soft place to land when you fall. And then he has such good friendships with his roommates as well, because they all live in a house together. It was actually one of my favorites from this series. So I'm glad that I read this book, because it then piqued my interest into reading more Willow Dixon books. The next one I read was actually book one, and that was Never Have I Ever Punched My Roommate's V-Card. This is a story between Finn and Beck. So you know how I talked about the fact that Matt lives in a house with a few guys? Two of his roommates are Finn and Beck. So the book starts off with a drinking game, and they talk about all the wild things that they've got up to as college students. Finn is very quiet, and they realize that he hasn't done any of the wild things that they're talking about in the book. So he and Beck, start hanging out together. He starts taking him out because Finn is very focused on his studies. And again, this book talks about pressure from his parents. He loves astronomy and he wants to study physics, but his parents want him to have a quite sensible job. I think he was studying economics or something like that, because he's actually quite bright. So he could technically study anything he wanted, but he obviously had no passion for going into the business world, and he wanted to be a physicist. So they bond and they talk and they explore a relationship with each other. Finn has always known that he was gay, but Beck thought he was, again, straight, and then he starts to discover his bisexuality, and then they fall in love. The thing about Willow Dixon's books is that her characters actually feel quite distinct. So Beck was kind of hesitant about putting a label on himself, because I think it's one thing to go about life thinking that you are one thing and then to discover partway through that you're another thing. And so he was kind of hiding his relationship with Finn, which is having a negative impact on their relationship as a whole. Finn was also being a good son. The thing about Finn is that he actually does come from a wealthy family, so however which way he goes about things, his parents would be fine. They're paying for his education, but he's afraid that if he chooses the path that he really wants to go on, they're going to stop paying for his tuition and everything. And so I like the fact that this book explores parental expectation and just going with your heart and realizing that your happiness is essentially better than your parents' expectations. And it's always better to have explored what you really wanted to do and then dealt with whatever came of that decision, rather than having gone through a trajectory or a path that you didn't want, only to have regrets at the end of your life. And I think that's something that this book makes extremely clear. I don't think I've ever read a book in which kinks were explored before. This is actually one series that really does it. Every book in this series deals with kinks in some ways, and I don't really think I had ever read a book that did. It was very eye-opening, very educational, and it was nice to see them each have that person that they could explore common kinks. We talk about consent, talk about limits, because I feel like a lot of books just don't. And even if they do, things are not usually as explicit as they are in this book in terms of how clear the communication is. Next one I read was again in the Never Have I Ever series, and this was book 2. This was Never Have I Ever Submitted to My Enemy, and so this follows Alex and Kai. They are both again in college. Alex is one of the 5 guys that live in the house that we've talked about previously. He is actually best friends with Beck from book 1. In book 1, they go through a struggle because Beck is trying to keep his relationship with Finn a secret, and Alex feels very offended by it. Alex has ADHD. He wasn't born to the most responsible people, and so he's always felt like he's too much. He's always felt abandoned. There's a part of him that's always felt lonely, and he just wants to be loved and accepted, and he struggles a lot with self-acceptance and self-love. And so the fact that his best friend didn't tell him that he was in a relationship because he wrongly assumed that he wouldn't accept him or just didn't confide in him really knocks him for 6. He's very upset by it, and he feels like it's driven a wedge, and every time he gets close to somebody and he feels them drifting away, it really hurts him, but he doesn't particularly know how to express himself. It's hard for him to talk about because he doesn't want to push them away, because he's had an emotional reaction to the fact that he feels abandoned and cast aside. And so he meets Kai. He has problems with Kai because they've had a previous sort of run-in with each other that wasn't very positive. And so they're paired on a group project together. But then also there's this anonymous app that you can go on. I think you can either date or just to get someone to sleep with. So they know each other in person, but they also have an anonymous type relationship over the phone because they're both on this app and you're not really required to divulge who you are on this app. And I think it's also an app that is specifically for people who have certain kinks as well. So it's very specific. They get along over the app faster than they get along in person. And it doesn't take very long for them to discover that they're this person. Kai is in school full-time. He's pursuing higher education and he is trying to pay for it all whilst coming from a family that's not very well off. So he's paying for his tuition. He is the son of a single mom. He also has a sister. And so he works part-time at a strip club. He works Friday to Sunday. And then when he's not there, he's like studying for his degree because he wants to get out of the town and do better for himself. And that's the only way that he can see it working feasibly, like working full-time and being in school full-time. So they're just grappling with those realities. I think this is one of those books in which I would say that the sex in the book is actually quite integral to the story, because sometimes you read about books that just have like copious amounts of sex scenes in them, but it either feels unnecessary or gratuitous. But this isn't. It actually does play into their dynamic as a couple. It's a dynamic that lets one for Kai to have, a semblance of control over his life in a way that he doesn't really have in real life because of all the circumstances that he's been through. And then for Alex, it gives Alex a way to just let go and fully trust somebody that is not himself, to be fully accepted by somebody else. This book, I think, for the most part, was very educational for me because it probably comes from a place of privilege. I don't have his particular struggles. So it was very educational for me to kind of see another side to how maybe sex can have an impact on somebody's life. Alex really found a family with Kai and his mother and his sister, and I thought that whole dynamic was really cute. I love the fact that he and Beck got to talk about their relationships and why they fell out and work on a way to earn back each other's trust. I love the fact that he learned to open up to the boys in his house as well and have relationships with them. It was very eye-opening and very educational. That was probably what I got most from it. And then the next book I read was Never Have I Ever Wanted My Brother's Rival. This is about Eli and West. So Eli is the 5th boy in this house that they're living in. Eli has made several cameos in each of the other books, but he was very mysterious and he would just pop up, say something that would, impact the rest of the guys, and he kind of kept to himself a little bit. So he was a bit of a mysterious character. So I was very curious about him by the time I got to this book, and I really, really wanted to read his story. Eli knows Kai. Unlike the other guys, Eli and Kai are local to where their school is. So they grew up together. Kai actually works with Eli's brother. But the thing about Eli, he's a cam boy. I haven't really read a book that centers a story about somebody who does camming. It was very eye-opening and very educational. And it's funny because when you don't read a book like this and you don't see depictions of people like this, there's a part of your brain that sort of doesn't understand why they do certain things, either because they have to or because of enjoyment. And I think a book like this really opens your eyes to certain circumstances and how you can be so blind and so judgmental to people's circumstances. And I think a book like this was really important, because when people talk about how sex work is actual work, it is, and it is many people's reality. Wes was actually a rival to Eli's older brother Gray, and they fell out, and the falling out of both of them had dire consequences on Gray's life and Eli's by extension. And so they don't come from a very wealthy family as well. Their family is just trying to stay afloat. Eli has abandonment issues from his own father. His mother got remarried to a man who is very lovely, but the stepfather's family don't accept him and Gray. So when his mother goes away with the children that she and his stepfather have had for like Christmas, he and Gray don't go because they're not accepted by the stepfather's family. And so that's an additional layer of complication to this story. And so he meets Wes again, because Wes's father owns the house that they live in along with many other properties. He's very wealthy. And so Wes starts working for his father and ends up managing the house. So when they start having plumbing issues and electrical issues, they get reunited, and then they get closer because they start spending time together, and then they navigate the waters of essentially Eli dating somebody that his brother hates, and the fact that somebody who he has held dislike and even at times hatred for so long for is now somebody that he has grown to love and care for, and how he has to reconcile the fact that he's now in love with a man that unintentionally kind of ruined their lives, and how to tell that to his brother. It was an exploration of kinks as well, so if that's something you like, it might be a book that you are interested in for that reason. It's so easy to look at these books and think that they are fluffy smut fests, but they really are dealing with very difficult subject matter, like dealing with child abandonment, poverty, trying to make a way for yourself, because Eli is trying to make all this money from camming so that he can further his own education. He's yet another person that is trying to get like a PhD and work in research. He's described as a genius in this book. And then the last book that I read was in a different series. It's called the Crimson Club series. It's by Willow Dixon. And I read Stepbrother Dearest, which follows Eli's brother, Gray, and Caleb, who is his stepbrother. So like I said, Eli and Gray were abandoned by their father. Their father gets remarried to the woman he cheated on their mother with, but that woman already has a son, so Caleb is that son. They saw each other probably like a handful of times in their childhood, but they had no relationship. Gray's father is extremely abusive. Caleb's mother is a male-centered woman, so she's willing to be with him at all costs, no matter how cruel he is to her own son. Eli and Gray's father uses each side of his family to abuse the other. And it's just such a complicated web of cruelty. So they meet when Gray has to go to the hospital. Caleb is a nurse. I wouldn't typically like to read a book about stepbrothers because that's just not my thing. But in this book, I think it did make sense, because first of all, I think Gray's dad has no business being married to anybody. He's a piece of shit. He doesn't deserve to be in a relationship with anybody. So in my opinion, he should be divorced from Caleb's mom. But they did have a relationship that I think was really beautiful. Again, it explores kinks. It explores the relinquishing of control. Willow Dixon has a way of really exploring how the sexual dynamic of a couple ends up helping their overall dynamic, which I thought was really interesting. They reconcile all their issues, and it ends up being a really beautiful book. It was really nice reading these books by Willow Dixon. I think it's a reminder that you can't really judge a book by its cover. I would say that if you're going into Willow Dixon, if you're somebody who doesn't like very many sex scenes, the books may not be for you because they are littered with them. And she really writes the book in a way in which the sex between the couples is integral to the plot, and their dynamic actually plays a role into helping them heal. So if that's not something they're into, I would avoid. The thing about reading books like these in quick succession is that you end up noticing patterns. Willow Dixon is a person who, despite her characters feeling distinct to me, you can notice that certain patterns and certain descriptions that do get tiring over time. There's certain things and words and phrases and nicknames. I just felt like it was a bit repetitive, and I feel like some parts weren't very developed, and a part of the writing was quite immature. It was nice to read about them. It was nice to explore things that I have never explored within a book. I think the biggest impact these books had on me was tampering down on preconceived notions, on judgment, on not judging books by their covers, not judging characters by their covers. All the characters felt unique. They didn't feel two-dimensional. They were full of nuance and complications. I like the fact that it explored power dynamics within a city, when really wealthy people are able to buy cities and then affect everybody else within those cities who are not as well off, exploring wealth gaps poverty, wanting to pursue higher education, wanting to better yourself, not particularly following a traditional path. I love the books for those reasons. My issues with them are like this in comparison to what I did learn from it and what it highlighted. The thing I took most away from reading these books is to keep my judgments at the door and to look at things from people's perspectives. And I think sometimes lessons like that are bigger than the stories themselves and bigger than maybe the flaws that you see. Sometimes if I read a book that teaches me something profound or something I've never known, or teaches me to question sides of myself that I hadn't considered before, I think they're bigger than the flaws of the book. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you so much for all the subscriptions to my channel. I really appreciate it. We are almost at 30 subscribers, which is wild. And I know it seems very low, but when you're somebody who has recently started a YouTube channel and you actually have almost 30 human beings that have subscribed to your channel, I think it's a big deal. It may not be a big deal to everybody, but it's a big deal to me to see those numbers grow, to see the views grow. It actually is unbelievable because I fully expected that nobody would view my channel and nobody would care what I had to say and nobody would watch and nobody would comment. And it's been, I think, the most humbling thing to see that people are interested in what I have to say. Leave me your own book recommendations, what you would like me to read, what kind of videos you would like to see. Thank you so much, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye.